Professors FM.
I'm Bridget Stomberg.
And I'm Lisa DeSimone.
And this is Taxes for the Masses.
Today, we're doing another episode on the tax proposals put forth by the 2024 presidential candidates.
In this episode, we highlight former President Trump's tax proposals.
Hello, B.
Hello, Lisa.
All right, we're back with our second episode on the 2024 presidential candidates' tax proposals as promised. Mm-hmm. We already talked about Harris, and today we're going to talk about Trump.
Okay.
And I'm not even going to try to hope for a more optimistic mood from you today.
That's a strong choice. Strong choice.
I think it's a reasonable choice.
Yeah.
It's a well-informed choice.
Well-informed. I like it. As Trump himself has said, and I quote, I want to be nice, but I haven't changed. Maybe I've gotten worse.
Oh, dear. Well, you're nothing if not predictable.
Okay. You know what? Correction. Maybe I will be a little bit happier today because this episode is going to be shorter than the one on Harris's proposal, so less time to talk about politics and taxes might bring a smile to my face.
And is this you exercising your right to protest? Like you refuse to talk about Trump for 30 minutes?
I do. And apparently he's refusing to talk about taxes, or at least he's not proposing many changes. He's proposing many fewer things than what the Democrats are likely to propose. So he doesn't have a lot to say. I don't have a lot to say.
Okay.
It's gonna be quick.
All right. So it seems like the tax proposals that former President Trump, or Honest Don, as he recently called himself on his Truth Social platform, has put forth, they are not as plentiful as those that Biden and Harris have put forth in the past. And maybe that makes sense, right? Trump basically got everything he wanted in 2017 when Congress passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and he signed it into law as president. That is by and large the tax law that we are all living with right now. And so I think Trump might say, if it ain't broke.
You're exactly right. Most of what Trump is proposing related to taxes is the status quo. You're right. He did what he wanted to in 2017. Why change it? So the largest changes would be to just extend, give us more of what we all love from the TCJA. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of proposals in there that are set to expire at the end of 2025. So today we're basically going to compare Trump's proposals to Harris's when they're talking about similar issues. Mm-hmm. And because Trump isn't saying a ton himself, you're going to love this. We're going to dive into the mandate for leadership.
Okay, I don't know what that is.
It's the offering from the conservative policy recommendations from the Heritage Foundation. This is basically Project 2025 territory that we're going to get into here.
I still don't know what these words mean.
It's going to be great.
Okay.
It's unclear whether Trump is actually going to embrace these recommendations. He's actually kind of trying to distance himself from some of this stuff because it's wildly unpopular. But two of its authors were part of his leadership team. So maybe people who he would listen to.
Okay.
You ready?
As I'll ever be.
Okay.
I guess we should start by saying that the proposals we're discussing come from the Tax Foundation's website. Mm-hmm. They're tracking where each candidate stands on taxes. And when you visit Trump's webpage, the blurb about taxes reads as follows. President Trump's vision for America's economic revival is lower taxes, bigger paychecks, and more jobs for American workers. Who can argue with that?
Now, I'm having a little bit of deja vu here.
Okay. All over again.
I feel like we heard those things before.
Okay.
Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, yes?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tax cuts and jobs.
Yeah.
Okay. And if any of you want to know how that went, you can check out our episode on that tax bill to learn more about who the winners and losers were and how that bigger paycheck, more jobs promise worked out. Spoiler alert, not great. Not great. So we've heard this promise before, and I'm going to say they didn't deliver.
Yeah, but election is all about the promise of what you could do.
It's fair.
Well, let's not get bogged down by what you may or may not have already done and how well it worked. According to Honest Don, he passed record-setting tax relief for the middle class and doubled the child tax credit.
Okay, I can't. I just, no.
Oh gosh, this is when I really wish we had video. Those of you who know Bee and have met Bee, you know she has a very loud face, and her face is screaming at us right now. I wish you could see it.
Oh my God, I can't. This is knowable. Okay, so he's going to tell you that he passed record-setting tax relief for the middle class and doubled the child tax credit. Let's just fact check that claim right out of the gate, shall we?
Go for it.
All right. Let's start with the easy claim. Did he double the child tax credit? You know what? Yes, he did.
Okay.
Or at least the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did, right? So Congress.
Next question. Did the TCJA generate record-setting tax relief for the middle class? Well, according to the Center for American Progress, 24% of the gains from the tax cut went to the top 1%, and just 20% of the tax cuts went to the bottom 90%. So the middle class benefited, but they did not benefit nearly as much as the wealthy. If we slice the data another way, the Bush tax cuts were estimated to have raised the average after-tax income of the middle 20% of households by 2.8%, whereas the Trump tax cuts boosted after-tax income by less than 1% for households in the bottom 60% of the distribution. That's a lot of math. So let me just boil it down. No, he did not pass record-setting tax relief for the middle class.
No. When one of your Republican predecessors gave 2.8 times the amount of tax benefits to a smaller portion of the population than no. There's nothing record-setting about that.
Nope.
But as you said, enough about the past. Let's move on to the future.
Okay.
So Harris is likely to propose an increase to the corporate tax rate and a reform of the international tax provisions that were part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. In contrast, Honest Don wants to leave the corporate tax rate at 21% and keep the international provisions as they are now. Because this is a key point of distinction between the two candidates, we should talk about the evidence in favor of each perspective. So let's start with corporate tax rate.
Well, as we mentioned on our last episode on Vice President Harris, economists tend to agree that corporate tax cuts over the last 30 years have contributed to a rise in wealth and income inequality. At the same time, there's evidence that tax cuts can increase employment, wages, and rents. But even in cases where tax cuts do lead to that sort of economic growth, most of the benefits accrue to the owners of firms, not to the workers at firms, thus contributing to a rise in wealth and income inequality.
If Trump wants to leave the corporate rate where it is, then, spending is likely going to have to remain flat as well, unless we want to continue to grow the deficit.
I do not.
I don't either. So the bottom line is that there's no simple or no right answer. We've said this before. Taxes are all about trade-offs and who you think should, quote, win or lose. So evidence on both sides, if you want to be really generous with relation to corporate tax cuts, but I think it's fair to say that most of the evidence suggests that cutting the corporate tax rate doesn't actually benefit middle and lower class workers.
Right.
So that's the first thing he wants to do, leave the tax rate where it is, also wants to leave those international tax provisions where they are. As our resident international tax guru, what are your thoughts on the current state of international taxes, and do we need a change, or are we great and fine where we left off after the TCJA?
I would say an obvious area that we could improve things would be to join basically the rest of the world.
Yep.
In their efforts to curb multinational tax avoidance by signing on to the global minimum tax, which has been agreed to by over 130 countries in the last couple of years. And it wouldn't be that hard, I think, to tweak our existing provisions so that we come into line with what the rest of the world is doing. So it would mean altering our current global minimum tax provisions under the GILTI in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is the provision that does already tax some of the foreign earnings of U.S. multinationals.
Yep.
All we have to do is change it so that it matches the 15% minimum rate, and to change the calculation to be more on a country by country basis, whereas right now it's pooled across all of your foreign countries that you operate in. We're making tweaks to something that we already passed, that Republicans already passed in 2017. And on top of that, the rest of the world is going to be applying this minimum tax to our multinationals, whether we like it or not. So us not signing on doesn't save our multinationals anything. In fact,
correct.
All it does is it allows other countries to collect that tax instead of us. So we might as well sign on and get that tax revenue.
You said that so nicely. They're the ones who created this idea. The Republicans created this idea.
It was their idea.
It was their, but clearly this is not consistent with the isolationist strategy that Trump is talking about. So the idea of us playing nice with other countries doesn't really fit into this protectionist, isolationist general policy scheme that he's got going. So I think it is unlikely that something like that would happen, even though, as you're saying, it is 100% logical to do so, because otherwise we're just giving up tax revenue.
Yeah, which is usually not a winning strategy.
No.
I would say another big area on the corporate tax side or the business tax side that Trump might want to think about is tariffs. So he proposes a universal baseline tariff on all U.S. imports and a 60% tariff on U.S. imports from China.
Do tariffs work? And when I say do they work, when you make an import more expensive, what are the consequences? Does it actually benefit U.S. corporations to make products and produced by foreign corporations more expensive?
Yeah, I mean, the intended consequence of a tariff is to protect your domestic production and domestic businesses, because you're raising the price of foreign goods for consumers. The problem with that is that you're raising the price of goods for consumers. I mean, yeah. So there's at least one study from the National Bureau of Economic Research that finds that tariff increases lead to declines in domestic output and productivity, it leads to more unemployment, and leads to higher inequality, probably because it raises the price of everyday goods, and that reduces the ability of lower income people to buy those goods.
So none of that sounded good.
No.
Okay, so we've talked about corporate taxes, international tax provisions, tariffs. Let's quickly touch on those TCJA tax cuts that are set to expire at the end of 2025 that Trump would be likely to support extending.
Okay.
So to be fair, both Biden and Trump want to extend a lot of these cuts. So this is an area where Harris is likely to want to extend some of these cuts, particularly the ones that benefit the lower income individuals. The key difference is that Trump wants to extend everything, right? Whereas Harris and Biden, like we said, only want to extend them for some individuals.
Yeah, those making less than $400,000 a year.
Or whatever that arbitrary cutoff is going to be.
Correct.
So under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, currently the top individual rate on ordinary income, only 37%. You've heard us say this before. It's set to go back up to 39.6% unless it's extended. In our episode on Harris, we've heard that she is probably going to be in favor of letting that rate go back up for people making over a certain amount of money.
Okay, that was easy. Anything else?
Just that Trump wants to create a free, federally funded online university.
Okay.
That awards free degrees. And most importantly, where wokeness is not allowed.
I'm very curious how he's going to fund this free federal university.
Any guesses?
I mean, I suppose there would be some logic to using some of the existing endowment tax to fund this anti-woke federal university.
You are wise. You are wise.
I am. I really am.
And it's not totally clear to me whether that is enough money to create an online institution that doesn't, quote, turn students into communists. I'm sorry, I tried to say it with a straight face and I couldn't get there. Is that one of your learning objectives, Lisa, to turn students into communists? Is that on your syllabus or is that part of your secret curriculum?
If it's a secret curriculum, it's secret even to me because I believe in property rights. But maybe I have worms in my brain. Well, we've learned that Trump's stated tax policies are fairly thin, but We also said that that's not entirely unexpected, given that we're currently living under many of the tax rules that were passed during his presidency with his full support. You decided we were going to spend the last portion of this episode covering the tax policy recommendations in the so-called Mandate for Leadership.
Okay.
It is apparently a policy agenda put together by the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, to represent the views of about 100 conservative organizations. Some of the contributors to the mandate include Stephen Moore, who advised Trump on fiscal and monetary policy during his first term, and Russell Vought, Trump's former budget director.
So as we said at the top of the episode, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that these policies may be presented to or have already been presented to Trump, and that they might be something he would embrace during his presidency.
Yeah. However, the mandate is 883 pages long. So I'm going to go ahead and guess it's beyond the realm of possibility that he would have read it.
So Chapter 22 of the mandate is about the Department of Treasury, which our listeners know oversees the IRS. Stephen Moore was one of the authors of that chapter, and it begins by noting how much the Treasury Department has failed under the Biden administration.
Oh, okay.
And it also notes that Treasury's mission drift into, quote, a woke agenda, which involves equitable economic growth and increased access to credit for low to moderate income communities. I mean, the horror, the thought
horror
that the Treasury Department is trying to focus on equitable economic growth and increased access to credit for low and I mean, what are they thinking?
The mandate encourages tax reform to minimize the cost of compliance. And that sounds good. I'm all for that.
Yes.
And to minimize interference with free enterprise. Okay, within reason. Sure.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Well, we're going to have a two-rate system that taxes ordinary income at either 15% or 30%. We're going to get rid of most deductions and credits. And we're going to tax capital gains at 15%. And the corporate tax rate would drop further from its current 21% down to 18%. We're also going to get rid of the minimum book tax, which is fine. I think we both approve of that. The stock buyback tax, which is fine. And we're going to eliminate all the green energy initiatives in the Inflation Reduction Act.
So personally, I'm going to say it's a mixed bag.
It's a fairly mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag.
It's also going to cap the amount of untaxed benefits like health insurance premiums and educational expenses that employers could offer to their employees. It's going to cap that at $12,000 per year, not indexed to inflation.
The plan would also cap the IRS budget, eliminate the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility at Treasury, and you're going to love this one.
Okay.
Withdraw the U.S. from the OECD.
I didn't even know you could withdraw.
Right? It's like a list, isn't it? It's like just a list.
I didn't know that we actively did things to be members of the OECD.
I don't think there's like an annual membership due that we're paying to be part. This is the political equivalent of take my name out of your mouth, I think.
Okay. So I have to say I'm kind of glad that Trump himself is not actually proposing these things, because some of them are a little out there.
So in the long term, the mandate suggests a move towards a consumption tax. We have an episode on that and all of the things that are problematic about consumption taxes. They particularly want to do a consumption tax in the form of something like a national sales tax or a cash flow tax.
In general, opponents of taxes like these make the very valid argument that they're regressive, because lower income households tend to spend a higher share of their income buying goods and services that are taxed.
So lots of things to not like about consumption taxes. There are some economists who say that if these taxes are well designed, they can actually encourage more savings and be used as a tool to either cool or stimulate the economy as needed, because they are tied to spending. So again, this is another situation where it could go either way, and it's going to really depend on the design.
All right. So if I did this on our last episode, I'm going to try to do it again here for Trump. If we had to boil down everything that we just talked about so far into a pretty high level summary, it would be that Trump already got all the tax provisions that he wanted, and so he just wants to keep extending them, but that he has surrounded himself by people who are proposing some kind of radical changes that may or may not be adopted by Trump. All right, it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly, our favorite part of the show. And it's my favorite part of this episode because you said you were going to try to be in a better mood. And so I'm thinking that means you have some good things to say.
We started researching this episode in April when we thought that this election was going to be pseudo-normal. and people
when we thought we knew who the candidates were.
You know. And so we stumbled upon this mandate for leadership like months ago. And so I felt like when the media got a hold of it and people started talking about it and people were like, have you heard of this thing? I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard of it. I found it. It was hard to find online back in April. You had to do digging to find it. But yeah, I've got all 883 pages of it saved on my computer and I'm well versed in chapter 2022. So I felt like we were a little bit ahead of the curve going into the details of this dystopian conservative universe.
What else is good here? I mean, I do still like that we're doing these episodes. I like that we're talking about the potential tax proposals of the two different tickets.
Agreed. And to be fair, there are some things that I do genuinely like in, Trump's proposals. We don't like the stock buyback tax. We don't like the alternative minimum tax, but again, I don't think that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act delivered for the American middle class in a record-breaking way. And I'm also not 100% sure that this zest and zeal for the child tax credit would continue. Although maybe it would, because now we're going to get into the bad. We've got J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, saying that people with kids should pay less tax.
He's been saying a lot of things about kids and women and kids and cats and women with kids or without kids and with cats.
I mean, in fairness, J.D. Vance, spoiler alert, most people with kids do pay less in tax right now because of the child tax credit. Mm-hmm. So sure, that's a radical proposal. Go with that. Maybe worth noting here that Vance is also in favor of a higher tax on university endowments. Wants to raise that to 35%.
Oh.
Yes, for private secular schools with at least $10 billion in endowments. Focus on the word secular, please. Yeah. So if you are a religious institution, you're going to escape that. Much like the mandate, he would repeal all of the electric vehicle credits, the clean energy credits from the Inflation Reduction Act, and would replace it with a tax credit for cars manufactured in the U.S. Spoiler alert, many of the cars that qualify for the electric vehicle credit are actually manufactured in the U.S. already. And wants to restore upfront expensing of research and development. That's very similar to what Harris and Biden, Democratic proposal. And then wants to make permanent a deduction for flow-through business income that we had an episode on that largely accrues to higher income individuals. So nothing too dramatic there, inconsistent with what Trump would say.
I mean, that was a lot of detail. I feel like that's more detail than we have on some of the other candidates at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, and a lot of that came from his time as, senator and some bills that he signed on to or proposed or what have you. But I think the only thing he's really come out and said since being selected as Trump's running mate is that people with kids should pay less tax and have more votes.
Oh, more votes too.
Yes, I don't know if you missed that because you don't care about the future of this country as much as I care about the future of this country.
I did not know that. Thank you for telling me what I care about.
Yes, I figured somebody should, and it might as well be me. It might as well be J.D. Vance.
I guess so. I think we're into the ugly, and I find it disappointing that we clearly have a deficit problem.
Oh, yeah.
That's a problem. That's a function of both spending and collection of revenues. People like to spin it as one or the other, and guess what? It's both.
It's both.
And so I don't know how we can talk about overcoming what to me seems like a bad financial situation of our federal government that's growing worse without trying to talk more about not just like what's going to get you my vote, but what's going to keep our government financially above water. That seems important. to me. We're focusing on the wrong things, people.
Yes. The point of these 2 episodes was just to give you, again, a high-level view of how these candidates are thinking about taxes and equip you with some academic research, some evidence to help you evaluate the policies that these candidates are putting forth.
Amen, sister.
All right, are we done with that now? Can we go back to non-candidate tax issues, please?
Please, yes. Well, that's all we have time for today.
Be sure to join us for more tax nerdery on future episodes of Taxes for the Masses.